So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Path of Awakening Buddhist Center, the course that we've been going through for so long, and we're going backwards a little bit into Volume 2 of the Profound Treasury, chapters 43 and 44, on Vipashyana. I guess every time I read this material, and I've been reading it for some years now, it impresses me again how profound it is. It just gets deeper and deeper, and I guess it's maybe my understanding is improving, I hope. And I think it would be the same for all of us, that we go over these teachings again and again, and each time they seem almost new. And I think it's because our understanding of them is new every time. Vipassana is the practice that will take you all the way to the end of the path. It changes its name as you proceed in the path, but not so much because the practice changes, as because your understanding of it deepens. And as that happens, your understanding of who you are and what the world is deepens as well and changes. But the basic practice that we do, that one does almost from the beginning of the path, not quite, you start with shamatha. That basic practice of bringing your mind back into this space here, now, is always the same. It's just that the way you experience it definitely changes. I started this out on shamatha. For a few years now, I've been doing shamatha at night, often when I can't sleep. Sometimes I find that emotional thoughts, aggressive thoughts, yes, are going through my mind, and they keep me awake with emotions. So I practice shamatha, watching the breath going out, counting it. Out breath, 1. Out breath, 2. And I can see in which the way it defeats the constant embroilment in thoughts and emotions. It brings one back from those thoughts and emotions, which are always about the past and the future. Even when they're about the past, they're really about the future. Hopes and fears for the future. And when you watch the breath and count, it brings you back. You'll find, or if you're like me, that at times you think you've been watching and counting the breaths, and you actually have been having a daydream, night dream, daydream. And then the breath and the counting interrupts that dream, and you come back to what is happening now. Excuse me. So it's very, very useful to practice shamatha. It's the core practice. It's the foundational practice. It's the practice that begins to make us sane by bringing us back from dreamings of all kinds. Hopeful dreams, fearful dreams, angry dreams, passionate dreams, sorrowful dreams, frightened dreams, whatever they may be, we have them all. And they're dreams. When we're dreaming, we're not here. We're not awake. We're not in the present moment. We're off in la la land, in the land of dreams. And so the breath, when you come back to the breath, it only happens now. You can feel it as it leaves your nostrils or your lips as you prefer. And you go out with it. And there'll be times when you've been going out with the breath, and suddenly you realize that while you were doing it, you were dreaming. And you've lost track. Maybe you were going to turn around at breath 7 or 21 or whatever you choose. Typically, the traditional form is 7, 14, 21, 108. I like 7. But the other day, I was doing it online with some other people, and they were doing 21, and that works. And then suddenly in the middle of it, I realized I'm off in a dream. I'm actually back in New York having a conversation with a friend. And then I come back to the breath. So I really encourage you to practice some shamatha, some mindfulness practice. It's the basic fundamental principle of coming back from dream into awareness in the present moment. Then, having come back after a while, we should be practicing Vipashyana. Vipassana literally means superior seeing. The term in Tibetan is hluk tong. Hluk means superior and tong is seeing. And there are two approaches, the term Rinpoche just mentions, because really we only study one of them. We only work with one of them. The first approach is what's called analytical Vipassana. It's contemplative. It's conceptual. You consider points. So for instance, you might contemplate the teaching on egolessness or the 3 marks of existence altogether: suffering, impermanence, and egolessness. And that can be a form of Vipassana. It's contemplative, but it's practiced more by the Gelugpas and the Sakyas. The second form of Vipassana is practiced more by the Nyingmas and the Kagyus, and it's emphasized more. All sects practice both forms. But the second one is the one that we do, which is meditative. Going out, your awareness, resting your awareness in space, being aware of all of this right now. You can use the breath, which is a shamatha element, to take you out, or not. You can just flash on this. And that's Vipashyana. Let's do it. Just bring your mind here into this room with the computer screen and this voice, with your body in the chair or wherever it is on a cushion, with your awareness of your environment effortlessly. You don't have to be aware of anything in particular. It's just a wide open awareness. This is hluk tong, Vipashyana, superior seeing. It's also superior living, because we come back to our lives as they truly are now, giving up our paranoias and hopes and fears and reminiscence. Thoughts about the past, what happened yesterday or an hour ago, are just dreams. They're like movies. They're not true. They're just partial recreations of this vast panoply of event that is happening right now and that happened 5 minutes ago. But we pick out particular aspects of it and say, oh yeah, I remember that. And what we remember is something that is funneled through our particular predilections, likes, dislikes, hopes, fears. Oh, I wish I had a room like that. Then I'd be happier, we say, of the room that we were in 5 minutes ago, 3 hours ago, whatever it might be. So shamatha is the ground. It's the ground because it brings us back from dreaming. into something very concrete in the present. But too much shamatha could be a problem. You could wind up dwelling in peace, sort of using it to bliss out in peace. That's been done. He says, so it's very important to convert the relaxation and awareness of shamatha into the post-meditation activity of Vipashyana. See, Vipashyana is just aware of anything and everything. So you can do it while you're sitting on a cushion. You can do it while you're walking down the street. You can do it while you're sitting on the toilet. Anywhere. It's life. He talks about having a 50-50 balance of shamatha vipassana. He says, like a pond of shamatha beautified by the lotus flower of vipassana. How romantic. What it means is that you're using the practice of meditation to come back from the dreams of what never really happened yesterday, 5 minutes ago. Those very partial recreations, fictions, and you're coming back from them, or what you're imagining the future might be like. That's a good one. And you come back from that to this. Simple, open, aware. You're aware of what's going on the screen. You turn your head, the walls, the light, all of it, any and all of it. And that's Vipashyana. He says it's very important to convert the relaxation of shamatha meditation into the post-meditation activity of Vipashyana. That means that you remember to come back to awareness all the time. With Vipashyana, we sharpen our awareness, a tremendous expansion toward awareness. It's insight. It's the seed of prajna, because when you are actually seeing this, you're much smarter. You're not seeing it through the veil of concept. And it means that we can hear the teachings properly because we're giving up our preconceptions and coming back into simple awareness. We're able to study and perceive the subtlety and depth of the teachings. So the gate of wisdom is beginning to open. It's also the gate of well-being, that when we come back into this simple, clear awareness, there is a feeling that begins to develop. It comes without you trying. And in fact, if you try, it won't come. And it's a feeling of happiness, call it, bliss, you could call it, that's going a little far, of extraordinary well-being, of the well-being of being here, as opposed to lost in anxious thought. So we're expanding our conceptions of what is real and what is false. It's produced by being without aggression of any kind. This is the definition of Dharma. It is seeing the real, the present, here and now, clear. And in order to do that, we have to give up aggression. Aggression always wants things to be different than they actually are. That's aggression. And we give that up, and we are working with this. It brings clear thinking and slows you down. Shamatha does. Brings clear thinking and slows you down and produces the absence of aggression, which is based on speed and confusion. Shamatha is the starting point of dealing with aggression, he says. In order to perceive or understand the Dharma, you have to develop a state of mind without aggression, a mind based on non-ego and non-speed. And that is a mind based simply on natural awareness that is already here. We're not creating it, we're just tuning into it. So he talks about how in the skandhas, the development of ego, suddenly there's that out there and there's this here, and we've got this relationship going that's problematic. And there's a gap every time that raises its head, ego creates itself. Suddenly we're here all the time in open space, and then we say, uh-oh, what about that and me? And that's ego arising. And it may proliferate, it may get more complicated, but eventually it ends, like all things, like this sentence, like this gesture. And when it ends, there is a gap in ego. And this is the opportunity for Vipashyana, for seeing. Then we go back in and we say, oh, well, am I really doing Vipashyana? Oh, I should be worrying about this other thing. I think I'm making a mistake, blah, 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 blah. And then we're not doing Vipashyana. And then that ends. We run out of breath. And here we are. Because it's our being, it's our nature, it's what we truly are, this Vipashyana. In other contexts, it's called Buddha nature. It's what we truly are. That doesn't mean we're fully enlightened beings. We have this potential within us. It's covered over by self-doubt and desire and fear and future. But when those gaps occur, and they always do, just like the gaps between these sentences, here we are. Yeah, he says, gaps of non-ego go on constantly, and then we rebuild ego again and again. This makes the application of Vipashyana possible in the gaps. See it. Here it is, right now. Such gaps are unconditioned by dualism, and they are sudden. And he says 1/100th of a second or of a moment. They just snap. There it is. The reason we can arouse potential prajna, that's superior seeing, that's wisdom, by means of Vipashyana is because there are these gaps all the time, into which we insert Vipashyana and relate with unconditioned mind. This is unconditioned mind. The fact that you can see and hear everything effortlessly now, that's unconditioned mind. As opposed to thinking mind, which says, well, if I do this, I can call it Vipashyana, and then maybe I'll get some stars that I can put on my chart and indicate that I'm really progressing and so forth. That's not unconditioned mind. So he says its Vipashyana technique is mindfulness of effort. It's a sudden effort, a sudden glimpse of awareness that brings us back. And then disown it. It's not yours. If you try to hold on to it, it turns into junk. When a sudden glimpse of awareness comes to you, you be with it, but at the same time, disown it. It's not mine. I don't own anything. It has nothing to do with me and mine, and everything to do with reality that is always here. He says, although you throw it away, the technique, the attempt to try and get something, you never really lose it. It comes back to you. Later, you realize that this Vipashyana type flash is associated with unself-conscious mind. And shamatha is so helpful. That's why we did a little bit tonight. I want to encourage you, saying it again, practice pure shamatha, counting the breaths. See what it gets you. And what it gets you, according to the teachings, is peace. Peace from thought, which is not peace. Thought is full of, what came to mind was Sturm und Drang. That's a German expression. It means storm and thunder. That's what thoughts are full of. Whereas Vipashyana, pure awareness, is completely clear. So watch your breaths and watch how hard it is to count them, to stay with them, and how your mind goes off. And then you come back. I can't tell you the number of times I'm counting to 7 and suddenly I'm at 15 because I was thinking. He says, a sense of thisness in shamatha. This, there's the breath. It's this. Is still happening rather than otherness, which is Vipashyana, which has a sense of atmosphere. When we practice Vipashyana, there's this sense of the atmosphere, the whole room, the world. In Vipashyana, less emphasis on this and more on letting go, letting be all of this. The breathing happens not only of its own accord, but in the realm of the atmosphere around it. It's something completely outside our body, goes out. Shamatha is very literal, whereas in Vipashyana, there is room for ventilation or fresh air. It's more romantic. You might feel guilty when you begin to practice Vipashyana because it's so effortless and natural. You come back to this. Any effort obscures it. We just come back and here we are. We already are here. It's our Buddha nature. Tathagata Garbha. All beings have Buddha nature, but it's not evident yet in many of them because it's covered over with defilements, with chasing chimeras. How do you pronounce that? I think I pronounced it wrong. So then he talks about letting go. First, there is shamatha, which we did, tight practice. The precision is carried over, but a sense of freedom is added on. As you progress, you practice letting go more and more. This extends all the way into Tantra, Vipashyana, in which letting go is really developed. At each stage, you think you have been letting go completely, but because of the dogma you're involved in, the teachings, you find that you have been keeping something private and personal. So as you go along, you find something to let go of constantly, even though you thought you were letting go completely. You're letting go basically of trying to be right, good, perfect. And instead, you're recognizing this as the real. And the role of a teacher is to present a more and more loose and free style of practice. That's what he says. So in Vipashyana, when you sit, you can work with the breath, just like in shamatha. But in shamatha, the emphasis is on being aware of the breath. Out breath, 1. In breath. Out breath, 2. In breath. Whereas in Vipashyana, you go out with the breath, it dissolves into space, it's gone. And here we are, right now, awake here. With awareness, he says, your mindfulness becomes much lighter, less heavy. However, it doesn't become completely free and careless because you're still continuing your practice, your basic training, which is good. Sometimes honesty and seriousness can get in your way. So the thing is to see that with humor, as if you were saying something very serious and meaningful, and someone kept repeating it, making a joke out of it, he says. Yeah. So Vipashyana is based, at least in the beginning, on coming and going with the breath, with awareness that it brings. There's awareness of this right now. We learn how to handle ourselves, so it allows us to be less awkward. And before we move on into the next chapter, I'd like to open this up to some discussion. Comments, questions, complaints. Anybody. There's no right or wrong here. We're exploring our minds. We're exploring reality and confusion. Well, Fred, I knew you would do it, Fred.
I had to.
I was going to call on you.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience reading this chapter. I sat down on the subway, and before I even pulled the book out, a girl next to me starts commenting. She like comments on my shoes. She's like, "Wow, those are really nice shoes." And then I open up the chapter, you know, unconditional mind. And she just looks at it, she's like, wow, unconditional mind. We get into a conversation, I'm listening to her. She's telling me about saints that she's into, and she's on her way to the Rubin Museum. And I dropped to her, I'm like, you want to know how to see unconditional mind? And she said, yeah. I said, next time you sneeze, that's it.
That's good.
Right? It's right there. And that resistance to shamatha, it's quite irritating. And I might have to dive back in there and not, the teaching says, not rest too long into it. Right.
The beauty of the shamatha is that it makes you aware to what extent you're dreaming, and it brings you back. It brings you back from the dreams, which can be a really good thing if you're trying to get to sleep and the dreams are very stressful, emotional. It brings you back from them and helps you sleep. But it shows you the difference between thinking and awareness. And then Vipassana, yeah, it can come in these flashes, but eventually we begin to realize it's here all the time. It is what we fundamentally are. It's just that we get lost in something else. I think you can also begin willy-nilly. It comes along in spite of yourself. A feeling of extreme, extraordinary well-being. A feeling of beginning to become free from the imprisonment of thought. This can definitely start coming along with Vipashyana. Because we're waking up. We're not creating something. We're not creating something new. We're tuning in. We're beginning to tune in and wake up to what is truly there. That's the beauty of this. And I think it's a little difficult to speak of, but this feeling of well-being, extreme well-being, there's really, to call it well-being is almost an understatement, that can come along as we begin to realize that it's already here and we are it. We may only experience this in moments, in flashes, or in flashes. What we got? It doesn't have to be a flash. Flash sounds violent. But in a moment of discontinuous awareness, suddenly something new or different is happening. In the Tantras, they'll call it lots of things. Very.
Well, I was just going to offer from my own experience that for a while I had a long walk to work down from Grand Central to the Flatiron Building. And I'd been doing retreats. And every morning as I was walking, I would keep coming back. And every time I did, it was like stepping out of a noisy room into fresh air. And everything is more vivid and alive and awake. And it was like waking up. And then I get preoccupied again and I go, oh yeah, I wake up. And it was actually very dramatic. Night and day.
That's so helpful. Thank you. It's so helpful because each one of us experiences this in our own unique and different way. It's the discovery of our own personal freedom from our own personal neurosis. I mean, eventually, I suppose it goes beyond personal, but it's so, each one of us will do it differently.
I got a question on the sense of well-being. Is like humor associated with that sometimes?
Sounds right.
Yeah.
Why not?
Right. Yeah. You just feel good.
I mean, one of the first talks I ever heard Trungpa Rinpoche gave was titled Sense of Humor. I was so serious in those days, I couldn't appreciate it. I'm talking 1970, early. But he felt humor, sense of humor was very important on the path. So yeah. I think, I guess I've been assuming there's a teacher, Ringu Tulku, who many of you might know or know of. And he was here in Boulder a little while ago and he gave a series of talks. At the end of every talk, he asked for jokes. He asked us to stand up and tell jokes. Yeah, why not? I could tell you a joke. I'll tell you too, and I've been saying this, I'm reading this book, wonderful book by Mathieu Ricard about Patrul Rinpoche. It's called Enlightened Vagabond. And it's one story after the next about a real one-off person. Well, let's go on to the second chapter and finish what we're doing this evening. This is shorter. So he says, Vipashyana enables you to see the potential for egolessness. See, ego is it's a lot of action. You got to be thinking about me, I, and you, and other, and what we're going to do together, and to each other, and all that stuff. And so when we come into Vipashyana, it clears all that out, and we begin to experience egolessness and understand it more. He says, plucked tongue, seeing in a superior way, you're seeing without ambition or ego-centered projects. As soon as ego and its projects enters the picture, plucked tongue is gone. Vipashyana is gone. We're not in this open space of awareness anymore. We're thinking about ourselves. So it's beyond categorizing things as good or bad. Vipashyana. It's seeing everything as they are. And you don't have to categorize things into their categories, good, bad, better, worse, whatever. It's replaced by simple awareness right here. So he says you're developing a higher, as it were, level of awareness, seeing things just as they are. Accepting and rejecting are not removed, but they're nullified, neutralized. So you're not a zombie, he says. He likes to say that. He's been saying that lately in a lot of the things we're reading. This isn't a matter of being a zombie, but you're more capable of handling your life because you don't have emotional reactions. You're not upset by what you experience. You're not picking and choosing, which makes you much smarter and more competent. The sense perceptions are fully functional. In fact, they're even more functional. And you remove the subtle consciousness associated with selecting, with liking and disliking. You remove it by means of meditation practice, which means you have much more equilibrium. So it begins with shamatha practice and the practice of labeling thoughts thinking. And it means catching the thoughts as they're arising. You can sit here and you suddenly realize, I'm thinking. And you just let them go and come back into the awareness of this present space. Let's do it right now. We're thinking about dinner, thinking about the movie we're going to watch when this is over. And then let it go. You identify it. You say, oh, I was thinking. You let it go, and you're right here. This is the practice of shifting your loyalty from neurosis to awakening. He says you simply see thoughts as thoughts. You don't become involved with the thoughts. You don't see them as bad or good thought. If you do that, you're back in thought again. So they have less psychological value and less karmic effect. You cut the thought, or you just let it go. As soon as you're aware that you're thinking, you can let it go and it just evaporates. And the next one doesn't come up for a while. Might just be an instant, might be longer. So when you begin to catch thoughts, they don't get the chance that they had otherwise to elaborate into whole schemes of love and hate and worry and all of that. So they have less psychological value and less karmic effect. That means they don't bind you into some stream of karma, some stream of action. When you cut the thought for a moment, however long, Might be longer than a moment. The next one doesn't come up. So these thoughts don't have a chance, or not as much of a chance, to get to the level of love and hate, which involves karma. Karma here means future embroilment. When your thoughts get to the level of love and hate, you get embroiled in action. You might go into action. You might seek revenge on that person that you know did you harm. You might seek to seduce that person you find attractive, whatever it might be. So labeling thoughts thinking begins to nullify karma altogether. That means you begin to free yourself from the stricture, from the binding, from the imprisonment of thought. You don't plant further karmic seeds because you're mindful. You begin to become freer of karma. Without this, you have endless thoughts and you are bound by them. So it's important to develop mindfulness. So sitting practice is not the result of karma. It's a fresh start. We're cutting karma. He says, with Vipassana in your system, you begin to attain what is known as Vipassana heedfulness or Vipassana awareness. And out of that, you begin to develop continual samadhi or the stillness that comes from being able to communicate with the fundamental goodness of the world. You see that the world is neither for you nor against you. That's a good one. The world is workable. It's not problematic, nor is it extremely helpful. We can work with it, and it doesn't turn us into zombies. It turns us into people into Buddhas. He says, Vipassana develops in post-meditation. It is all over the place. A city is living Vipassana. Constant awareness when you walk out your door. So Vipassana diffuses the pinpointed awareness that you could develop with shamatha. It diffuses it into larger scale experience. And the senses become synchronized much more fully. In Vipassana, the emphasis should be more on the gaps than on sitting practice alone. Vipassana takes you out into the world. He says, when you have a gap, you should leave it alone. Just have a gap and relax. Just enjoy your gap. Here I am, awake, aware. You should practice Vipassana in all your daily activities, no matter how mundane. Everything. Washing the dishes, brushing the cat, whatever it might be. And then he talks about sacred action and natural order. That whatever you do, with a mind of Vipassana especially, is sacred action. We don't mean magical or God-ridden, but shamatha Vipassana-ridden. That's what sacred means. Awake, aware, as it is. Please pay attention to everything, he says. Because this produces Vipassana freedom, freedom from trying to make oneself better than worse, and a smoothness that develops in one's experience. You're really entering into the world of reality, waking up. There's this feeling of discovery. that the world is as it is and not as you hoped or feared it to be. You can let all that go. And there's a feeling of solidity and of comfort. It says liking and disliking are purely the result of our passion and aggression. There is no intrinsic logic to liking or disliking beyond that. That's something that you could put on the refrigerator, engrave on your eyeballs. He says liking and disliking are purely the result of our passion and aggression. There is no intrinsic logic to liking or disliking beyond that. Don't you think that's so amazingly profound? Liking and disliking are just our aggression and our passion. Any comments? Through Vipashyana, you can experience the vastness of the world, as opposed to being self-centered in your own world. You have to experience the vastness of the world you're expanding into, the world you're about to deal with. He says, we have the perfect opportunity for realizing this awareness when we don't let hope or fear, liking or disliking, come into the picture. We don't let them in. That is how, even as beginners, we can actually reduce samsaric possibilities and free ourselves from future karma. If we get involved in liking and disliking and we go into action, we try to attack what we dislike and cultivate what we do like. And that's karma. And we build a whole little world. And that will lead us to being reborn in the lower realms. The lower realms are the hell realm, which is the realm of hatred, the hungry ghost realm, which is the realm of feeling insufficient, poverty-stricken, and the animal realm, which is the realm of fear, fear of predators, and of stupidity, of just eating what comes in front of our nose. So by developing Vipashyana, we cut all that leads us into those states. Finally, he says, if we're able to work with situations properly and effectively, we can block the possibility of being born in the lower realms. And then the higher realms as well. Higher realms are blissful, and we don't want to be born there either. They're cul-de-sacs. You get stuck in them. Finally, we can be born in Sukhavati. Sukhavati is Avalokiteshvara's realm. It's the realm of enlightenment. We might even attain enlightenment. That's always possible. But we really have to start at the beginning. We have to earn it. We ourselves have to do it. That is what is meant by non-theism. This is a non-theistic tradition. Nobody is going to save you. You have to do it yourself. So we can have a little more discussion. A lot of people haven't spoken. This is all about becoming free from hope and fear, kleshas, like and dislike, all of which binds us, sets us on a course, a dream, enslaves us to dreams. So they call it waking up. And we practice it by coming back. I encourage you to try shamatha, counting the breaths. when you get into bed tonight, just do it first thing for a while, however short, doesn't matter. You might like it. Unless you like to get into bed and start dreaming right away. Very.
I know I already spoke once, but
What?
I say I know I already spoke once. So, but anyway, I discovered something recently with mindfulness and sleep that I woke up and I was having trouble getting back to sleep, and I relaxed, and I started just coming back, and I started to have the experience of really enjoying just being there. And I wasn't struggling to go back to sleep anymore. And it was really enjoyable. And then I was out.
Yeah, it's funny what happens when you try to use shamatha in bed. I've said this before, but I'll just say it again, that I'll be lying there thinking this isn't working. And then suddenly it's 5 hours later and the alarm is going off. It's like, it's very funny. Lots of people haven't said much. This is our path, all of us. We're all on it. We're all doing this, sharing it. Ed.
Yes, thank you, everyone who's spoken, and particularly John. Um, so I think one of the words that was used, probably in the text as well, egolessness without ambition. And I've kind of been playing around the last few weeks or months on words that might help me get to an understanding. Excuse me for imposing on you. Now, what does to impose on someone mean? That's a very, very vague concept itself. So that's good for our purposes, I think, because what I'm thinking of emptiness as is an absence of imposition. So you're here not trying to to structure something or to describe it or think about it or anything to impose whatever you are on it, and that's kind of helped me um, get uh, get to a better sense of emptiness and what we're striving for, I think.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Mark.
Hi. Thank you. Yeah, this is great. Coming back to our other books is it's true. It's just changes so much every time we read them, and we get more and more out of them, which is always great. I was just well, one thing was you can sleep and you can be sleeping in bed and enjoy the I forgot I always Vipashyana. You could do that too, right? While you're focusing, not just counting. You could be looking at your environment. Okay,
Definitely.
thank you.
Even with your eyes closed.
Right, right.
Yeah. You're here. Yeah. And you can work with the breath. Breath goes out into the dark and it expands, and then there's just whatever is you're aware of. It might be your body in the bed, might be the sound of your breath. Who knows? Yeah.
Also, I was thank you. I was thinking about also the kind of the goal, I guess, which is egolessness. And I was, I've been thinking from time to time and really trying to imagine. I used to think about, well, I do think about when eventually we pass on and become part of the world around us, but that we're actually doing this every day. you know, and I just to remind myself that I'm breathing in the world around me and I'm exhaling carbon dioxide from my body and my skin cells are falling off and I'm leaving them all over the place. And I've been doing it for 68 years. I mean, you know, I probably have more cells I've thrown away than I've kept. Anyway, so I just thought that's kind of a nice way to make ourselves a little less ego driven. Just to think of that we're actually throwing ourselves all over the place, all the time. We're spreading ourselves around. And no, I have a tremendous ego, and I'm still fighting with people over rules in the park and the such. And so I don't make any claims of it's hard. That one aspect, I try not to fight, but sometimes people start cursing at me or, you know, doing something that, and I don't curse back at them, but I do tell them that they shouldn't be doing that. You know, they shouldn't be talking to me that way. Not exactly in those terms, but again, that's my ego popping up. Anyway, I know I'm all over the place. Anyway, that's it. Thanks. Goodbye.
Carolyn likes this. Yeah. Anyone else? Is it all right that we're going backwards, you know, back into the first volume? How do people feel about that?
I like it.
Philip?
Sure. I think it's good. There's so much that's introduced here. And in a few pages and in an hour and a half, all we can do is just touch the very tips of it. So in this chapter, there's this huge notion of what exists beyond what we usually experience, because our experience is limited by our ego, limited by our hopes and fears, our likes, our dislikes, our passion, and our aggression. And what is beyond that? And he talks about it a bit in the 5th section. It's sacred action and natural order. There's this entire universe that is just beyond the limit of our perception. Sacred action and natural order. He says, whatever you do is sacred action. Pay attention to everything.
Right. A different way of seeing this world, huh? Profound. Steve.
I think I remember something about um uh Trungpa Rinpoche saying that, like, even though it's the first volume, right? And it's the Hinayana volume, is that
Supposedly, yeah.
supposed? But basically they all kind of interconnect, so it doesn't really
Oh, yeah.
matter that we're going back.
Oh,
We're not
no.
actually going back, actually. We're just kind of,
No. Not only is what you're saying
yeah.
true, but the fact is that also the Trungpa Rinpoche taught the most beginning teachings in the most profound way. He taught them from the point of view of the end of the path, Ati, Dzogchen. And Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was probably the greatest teacher of his time, talked about Trungpa Rinpoche teaching the backwards path of Ati, meaning that he taught the most beginning teachings in the most profound way. I mean, I read this stuff and it's just going right, you know, in.
So I have no problem going back to answer your question.
I didn't have that question, but that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I thought that's what you were asking. If it was okay, we went back to instead of going on to the 3rd volume, we went back to the 1st. I have no problem with that. It's like you said, you pick up new stuff. Now that every time you read it.
It always almost seems like it's brand new, like I've never seen it before. For me personally, I don't know about the rest of you. Ed has his hand raised again.
Well, to take that one step further, if we're all fully enlightened to begin with, there is no first volume, there is no third volume. It's just an arbitrary allocation of different thoughts to make it manageable or to give us a handle so we can digest it. But it's really arbitrary.
I don't know. I think there are teachings that are more appropriate for people who are beginning, and more than as well as others that are more appropriate for people more further down the chute. Dan.
Yeah, I had the experience in the privilege I had of presenting some of the chapters on the Thursday night class that the the overlap between the Tuesday night class and the Thursday night class, you know, was it was indistinguishable sometimes, the boundaries, you know, the, the boundaries between the 2 days and between progressive stages on the on meditation on emptiness and volume one, and it was incredible. It was an incredible experience, both just in being able to present the chapters, but just seeing the overlap between advanced teachings and volume one. Yeah. And the other thing I want to say was, you've said that a couple of times, that every time you read it, sometimes it seems like you're reading it for the first time. And I've definitely had that experience. And not only do I see it the way you presented it and explained it, but I also see it as as we chant, whatever arises is fresh, the essence of the essence of realization. And I think that plays a big part in it too. Seeing the experience of seeing things for the first time, even though you've seen them many times before for the first time. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
I recently sat in on part of a class. Well, it wasn't a class. Well, it was a class, I guess. Part of Zigar Kontrol's Sangha that Valerie's involved with. And he gets everybody, the most beginning people as well as, people who've been around for a long time, to teach something. This is in a special environment, and I want to learn more about how it fits. And I'm thinking to offer it, to us, because when you present, you learn so much. Especially, you learn a lot if you're really afraid and nervous. Because then you really study hard. So I was thinking of, and I'm going to look into it more, maybe we should develop a new form that would involve people more. Woodrow.
Just a quick question. Is there a difference between Vipashyana and Sampanakrama?
What a question. What Lodro is referring to is that in tantric practice, Vipashyana practice, there is a particular level of practice where you work with a visualization, among other things. And you're working actually with all the senses. You're visualizing maybe a deity, so-called deity. Deity is in a Western word, it doesn't really fit. A yidam, which means a representation of wisdom. And you're saying a mantra, so there's sight, you're working with a picture, there's sound, not so much smell or taste, but you may be doing something physical as well, so there's body. And when you do that kind of practice, it's called creation and completion practice. And the creation is the act of, this is in Tantra, Vajrayana. The creation is the act of creating the visualization and the whole world. So for instance, when you start doing what is called nundro, these are the practices that constitute the entrance into the Vajrayana. And by the way, nundro is not trivial, not for beginners. I'm reading this book about Patrul Rinpoche, the great Patrul Rinpoche, enlightened vagabond. He's reputed to have done nundro 100 times. God, it's inconceivable. And when you do it, you always start out with what's called the completion stage, which is what Lodro is referring to, sampanakrama in Sanskrit. And sampanakrama is basically Vipashyana. It's Vipashyana taken to a, how shall I put it? It's not perfected, it's profound, which Vipashyana is, because you're resting your mind completely in the natural awareness that is what we are. And then within this open natural awareness of Vipashyana, you create the visualization that you're working with, which is the Utpatti Krama, Sampanakrama, Utpatti Krama. So if you're working with somebody like Vajrayogini, she's 16 years old, she's in flames, her hair is flames, she's wearing a garland of 64 freshly severed heads, which represent thoughts. She's wearing a crown of 5 skulls, which represent the kleshas, the emotions. She's dancing. She's a piece of work, and she's 16 years old. She takes other forms too, many other forms. Another one of her names is Vajra Varahi, which means indestructible sow, like a pig. And she takes that form. And she also came to Naropa in the form of an old hag bearing the 37 ugly marks. So, but she represents wisdom that is so extreme. And what you do is you start out the practice of working with a yidam by resting in pure awareness. And then you say the mantra of that particular deity. And out of that word, the deity arises. And you visualize the arising of that deity. And you visualize probably a whole scene around that deity. So, yeah, we haven't gotten there yet to these practices, but the key is Vipashyana. And in fact, it's not just Sampanakrama, Lodro. When you get to Mahamudra, Vipashyana is what Mahamudra is. When the Mahamudra is the sort of the apex of the Kagyu path. And when the apex of the Nyingma path is great perfection, Dzogchen. And the key to that is Vipashyana perfected. This open, pure awareness. In the Dzogchen tradition, it's called cutting through. The full translation would be cutting through to original purity. Original purity is what this world is, seen without good and bad, hope and fear. We're living in the middle of it. And one of the two main practices of Dzogchen is to see this world that way. And it's basically Vipassana. He's describing it in this chapter, beyond hope and fear, beyond good and bad. He could be talking about tantric realization. So yeah, Sampanakrama, Utpatikrama. In Tibetan, the word for Sampanakrama is Tsogrim, which means Tsog is perfect and Rim is stage. It's the perfection stage of the path, as opposed to Kyerim, which is the creation stage. Rim means stage. So, yeah, this is where we're all heading. And we're doing it now. That's an amazing thing that right from the beginning, we're getting this fabulous, profound teaching of Vipashyana. When you do Nundro, every time you sit down to do one of the practices, there are four, The first one is taking refuge, but people usually call it prostrations because when you take the refuge, you're prostrating, to one degree or another, depending on your physical capacity. And the second one is saying the Vajrasattva mantra, and that involves a visualization of Vajrasattva, who represents purity. And you say his 100-syllable mantra. And then the third one is mandala offerings, where you offer everything to the whole universe. And the fourth one is Guru Yoga, which means you're uniting with the mind of the enlightened mind of the teacher. All of them begin with Sampanakrama and end with Sampanakrama. Open space awareness. Out of the open space, you create the practice. At the end, you dissolve it back in and you sit in open space awareness. Call it Vipashyana, call it whatever. So this isn't a beginning teaching. We're getting close to the end. Anybody else? We have some people in this room who are doing their Nundro. And I just want you to know that Patrul Rinpoche supposedly did it 100 times. Oh my God, it's almost inconceivable. He must have been in some pretty good shape to do prostrations, because each one of these practices of Nundro, you do it, they say 100,000 times, but really it's 108,000 times. Can I read you a short little story about Patrul Rinpoche? Yeah. Hold on a minute. Here's the book. Mathieu Ricard, who wrote it, is a Frenchman who was a scientist, and then he became a monk. And he wound up being a translator for the Dalai Lama. And let's see which. It's sort of sheer luck whether we get a story, what story we get. There's so many of them. I bet there are a couple of hundred. So I'll read, this is a famous one. Patrol and the Widow. Okay, we got time. Just barely, this will do it. While Patrol was traveling on foot across the great plateaus of Golak, north of Tsachuka, this is in Tibet, of course, he encountered a woman, mother of 3, whose husband had just been killed by a Changtang Drimon, a huge bear of the Tibetan steppes, a beast much more dangerous than the Drimon of the forests. Patrol asked the woman where she was going, and she told him she was headed to Tsachuka with her 3 children to beg for food, as the loss of her husband had left them destitute. Then she began weeping. Kaho, don't worry, said Patrol. I'll help you. I'm going to Tsachuka too. Let's travel together. So she agreed, and so they walked together for many days. At night they slept outside beneath the sky. Patrol would nestle 1 or 2 of the children into the folds of his sheepskin coat, and the woman would similarly hold the rest. I remember he's just a filthy beggar, wearing this worn sheepskin coat that in another story they said has lice in it. Oh, happy day. During the day, Patrol would carry 1 child on his back, the woman would carry the second, and the third would walk along behind. When the woman begged in villages and nomad camps they passed, Patrol would beg right alongside her, asking for tsampa, butter and cheese. Tsampa is a form of food that's made out of barley grain and roasted. Travelers they met assumed they were a family of beggars. No one, least of all the newly widowed woman, guessed the identity of her shabby companion. Eventually they reached Tsachuka. That day the woman went off on her own to beg for food, and so did Patrol. In the evening when they returned, the widow noticed that Patrol had a dark look on his face. The woman asked, "What's wrong? You seem annoyed." Patrol brushed it off, saying, "It's nothing. I had a task to accomplish, but the people here won't let me finish it. They're just making a big fuss about nothing." Surprised, the woman asked, "What work could you have around here?" Patrol replied, "Never mind, let's just go." They came to a monastery on the side of a hill where Patrol stopped. He turned to the widow and said, "I have to go inside. You may come too, but not right now. Come after a few days." The woman said, "No, let's not separate. Let's go in together. Until now you have been so kind to me. We could get married. If not, let me at least stay at your side. I'll benefit from your kindness." "No, that won't do," replied Patrol, adamant. "Up to now I've done my best to help you, but the people here are troublemakers. We mustn't go in together. Come back in a few days. You'll find me inside." So Patrol went up the hill to the monastery, while the widow and her children stayed at the bottom of the hill, begging for their food. As soon as he was inside the monastery, contrary to his usual habit of refusing offerings, Patrol ordered that any provisions offered to him should be kept and put aside for a very special guest he was expecting, who would be needing provisions. The next day, everyone in the valley had heard the news of the great Lama's return. "Patrol Rinpoche has come," people said. "He'll be giving teachings on the way of the Bodhisattva." This is Shantideva's text that we studied. Men and women, young and old, monks and nuns, male and female, lay practitioners, everyone went hurrying to hear the great Patrol Rinpoche. People began to gather into a huge crowd, bringing along horses and yaks that carried their tents and provisions. When the widow heard the news, she was thrilled, thinking, "A great Lama has come. This will be my chance to make offerings and request prayers on behalf of my late husband." Along with everyone else, she climbed up to the monastery, bringing along her 3 fatherless children. The poor widow and her family had to sit at the far edge of the large crowd to hear Patrol's teaching. She was so far away that she could not see his features clearly. At the end of the teaching, like everyone else, she stood on a long line, waiting to receive the great Lama's blessing. This is something you'll encounter when great teachers give teachings. There'll be a blessing line, and you'll go up with a kata. Can you see behind me that white scarf hanging on the bookcase? Those are katas that are hanging there. And you carry a kata up, and you maybe have a gift, maybe money, maybe something else wrapped in the kata. And you bend down and you offer it to the Lama, and then he places his hands on your head and blesses you. Eventually, she moved up in the long line till at last she came close enough to see that the great Lama, Patrul Rinpoche, was none other than her shabby, kind, faithful traveling companion. Moved by both devotion and amazement, she approached Patrul, saying, "Forgive me for not knowing who you were. You are like the Buddha in person. Forgive me for making you carry my children. Forgive me for asking you to marry me. Forgive me for everything." Patrul brushed off her apology lightly, saying, "Don't give it a second thought." Turning to the monastery attendants, he told them, "This is the very special guest I've been expecting. Bring all the butter, cheese, and provisions that we have been setting aside especially for her." So that's the story. This book is full of hundreds of stories like that. What a piece of work that man was. Yeah. Fred.
To tell a lie like that, to say there's nothing but troublemakers here, is that, would that be considered crazy wisdom?
I don't think he said that. There's nothing but troublemakers here, did he? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in there, something like that.
Yeah, Emily. Well, I don't know.
I love that.
Oh, have you read that book?
No, I love that story. I've heard it, and
That's why I read it. I mean, the book is full of them. I'll bet there are 200 stories like some very short, that one was longer.
What's the significance of 108 in Buddhist tradition?
I mean, it's just a magic number, It's not a big deal. A mala has 108 beads. No, there are the 108 peaceful and wrathful deities. Actually, but there are a lot of 108s around.
Thank you.
And if you stick with it, you get to do 108,000 prostrations.
Oh, great.
I don't see too many people in this room who are going to be doing that, but there are some, maybe.
Hey, you never know. I never thought.
There are one or two, absolutely. And you know who you are.
I remember when Bernie told me, Bernie Weitzman, that he was doing prostrations, and he told me that he had to do 100,000 of them. I thought he was out of his friggin' mind.
Yeah.
Little did I know.
Yeah,
it's actually
it's time to go. 100,000. It just means a lot in Tibetan. The words 100,000 means a lot. In Chinese, they use the word one, which means 10,000 literally, but it just means a lot, So this is common to, right, Chinyi?
Sort of.
Huh?
Sort of.
I think it's that time, folks.
Okay.
Hate to break up the party, but
I'll put up the chants, and who's leading? Sarah, right? Hold on a second. Gotta get the chance. Oh, it's 7:01. My gosh, we're late.
Mute.
Mute.
Mute us, please.
I'm just getting the chance up. Hold on a second.
Mute.
And yourself. Thank you.
Mutiny.
Where is this? There we go. Slight computer problem.
I can do it if you'd like.
Can you do it, Barry?
Yes.
Good. You read this.
Okay.
Oh, I've got it.
Ha, beat you.
Okay.
Mute yourselves.
Oh. We will close with a prayer for peace, and then by dedicating the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times, and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Good.
Thank you, John.